Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy freaking Thanksgiving, everybody. Best holiday of the year as far as I am concerned. Talk about a great day to be great. And yeah, great day to also talk about some risers, some fallers, some sicko starts, and of course, some favorites ahead of week 13. I am your host, Ian Hartitz, but I cannot accomplish all of this alone. And accordingly, the boys are back. Dwain the Rock McFarland, Matt F. the Oracle Freedman. Fellas, let's freaking cook. Dwain, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Look, my wife is about to start cooking before long, so my stomach's not growling yet. But like all of the goodness that's going to be happening tomorrow, you know, it takes preparation. You got to do that today, just like we got to get people prepared to set their starting lineups. It's championship time, Ian. It's crunch time. We're trying to get in the fantasy playoffs. So hopefully, you know, I'll try to do a better job with my sicko starts. Sorry about Quentin Johnston, guys. We'll just get it out of the way right up front. As Ian was telling me and trying to console me before the show, the processor was right. The targets were there, but it was like Edward Scissorhands on the field. It just wasn't working out for Quentin Johnston in that game. So we'll try to watch the film and get better this weekend.
All we can do, Dwain Freedman. I know we're going to get to some actual football takes, but you strike me as the type of person who probably has a controversial Thanksgiving take or two. So lay it on us.
Actually, I do not believe I have anything controversial about Thanksgiving. One of the best holidays. 4th of July, certainly up there. Christmas, up there. But Thanksgiving, just a great time. And the pies. Okay. People might have pumpkin pie as your number one. What I will say personally is that if you aren't having pumpkin pie as your number one for the entire year, maybe don't just arbitrarily put it number one as your Thanksgiving pie. For me, I think it's always cherry. That's just me. Maybe that is a little bit of a hot take, but cherry, that's my number one pie. And I will say I have strategies when it comes to Thanksgiving. Like, do you fast the day before so that you are like fully ready to eat food? Do you kind of pace yourself a little bit with smaller meals beforehand so you don't like overly glut yourself at the beginning of Thanksgiving? And for people who have multiple Thanksgivings that they go to, you really want to strategize the way that you lay this all out, because maybe there's something on Wednesday night and then the big thing on Thursday and then another thing on Friday. So you really have to strategize based on what it is that you have before you. But it's a great day to eat a lot of food.
Man, I'd be down to dive into all of that, but unfortunately we got this fantasy football stuff to worry about. But I do appreciate all the thought you have going into that, Freedman. And, you know, I do hope that you figure it out for your stomach's sake before, again, today. So we are recording this on, Wednesday morning, shout out. So hopefully nothing crazy has happened. But guys, did want to go ahead and look ahead to some potential injuries impacting Turkey Day, primarily, Dwain, on the Lions offense. We do have David Montgomery dealing with a shoulder injury, Amon-Ra St. Brown with a knee injury. They were limited throughout the week, and we did hear Dan Campbell say he does feel good about them playing, but not ideal to have them banged up on the short week, particularly Montgomery, who maybe it's just Jordan Mason, recency bias impacting me, Dwain, but I don't like when these, physical running backs are actively dealing with injuries that seem like they're one bad hit away from flaring back up.
Yeah, I mean, it only takes one hit, to your point, and stylistically, that's the way Montgomery plays. Although Montgomery was in, rare form yesterday in the locker room with Jared Goff. That was cracking me up at the press conference. Well, they were in the locker room interviewing Jared Goff, and he was sitting right there next to him, and Jahmyr Gibbs is there too. It's the Sonic and Knuckles duo. But I do have Jahmyr Gibbs higher than David Montgomery. We usually do, but I actually bumped up his projections a little bit this week, just leaning a little bit more to Gibbs, assuming that they give him slightly more work with Montgomery dealing with the injury, or if there is a flare up, that's another way that we could see a few more touches for Gibbs. So right now, this season, we could go back to last year and it looks even better, but Gibbs is averaging 19.9 fantasy points, so almost 20 per game in the games where he's received 55% or more of the rushing attempts this year. I do think there's a good possibility of that this Thursday due to the fact that it's such a quick turnaround with the shoulder injury for David Montgomery. So slight downgrade to Montgomery, slight upgrade to Jahmyr Gibbs, and a matchup that we all like against the actually this one's against the Bears. Yeah. So the Bears, if you're going to attack them, like the on the ground is the way to do it. Pretty tough through the air.
They've been a little bit more mid recently. 5 straight games, allowing their 5 highest total yard marks since returning from their bye. So last point on the Sonic and, Knuckles thing. That's cool. Jared Goff, you're taking tails? That stupid freaking fox. You expect us to believe you're a top 5 quarterback and you're not saying shadow? Give me a break, man. I think that's a red flag for the Lions moving forward, but good for that backfield. Freedman, quarterback injury going on in New York, though. We do have Tommy DeVito dealing with a forearm injury, popped up as limited on Tuesday, and Brian Dable even said not 100% to play here on Thursday. So I know you've done a lot of work looking at, how spreads will adjust depending on quarterback changes. In your humble opinion, if we do see it go from DeVito to Drew Lock, how does that impact the spread, and how does that impact your projections for the Giants passing game?
So I have Drew Lock as 2.5 points better against the spread than Tommy DeVito. Obviously, Drew Lock should be the starting quarterback if all things were right. But I still think DeVito probably ends up starting. I don't pay too much attention to like the midweek downgrade unless a guy doesn't practice. And the fact that DeVito did practice, and it's not like the injury just randomly popped up during the practice. They knew beforehand, hey, he's got some soreness. We're just going to have him limited. I think he still ends up starting, but maybe there's the possibility of him getting benched at some point. But really, I just think it's kind of quote unquote all systems go for the Giants with DeVito at quarterback. But it is notable, Brian Dable has actually been pretty good against the spread without Daniel Jones at quarterback. 9-3 against the spread with anyone else not named Daniel Jones. So maybe that means the Giants, even though they are terrible, actually a little bit better than people would anticipate with someone besides Jones at quarterback.
Again, those are the key injuries to be ready for on Thursday. But speaking of Daniel Jones, did in fact sign with the Minnesota Vikings, now going to be the backup for Sam Darnold, presumably, potentially, I should say, J.J. McCarthy in 2025 and beyond. Dwain, just absolutely huge league-altering news here. Do you have a take on Daniel Jones now being the QB2 in Minnesota?
I don't have a take other than, the Nick Mullins, crowd is going to be in shambles. Like Nick Mullins seems to have, it's kind of like one of these bands that that not everyone knows, but they do have like a very niche following, and these people are hardcore. Like that's Nick Mullins. Like there is a group of people out there that really believe Nick Mullins is a baller. And I will say, like when he gets in the lineup, man, he's YOLO, so we like it. He's kind of like a Jameis Winston style player. Maybe that's why people like it, because it can equal fantasy points. We saw that last year down the stretch. So Daniel Jones would be a much more conservative approach, most likely. But we've seen Sam Darnold, former first-round draft pick, doing really well with the Vikings. If Daniel Jones did have to step in, Ian, I'm assuming he would look better than he did with the Giants because he has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, and you've got Kevin O'Connell calling the play. So would be an upgrade for Daniel Jones if that's the sort of thing you're looking for. But I just hope Sam Darnold stays healthy because I like the way he's playing.
I'm with you. And just seems inevitable that Jones will at some point get, a 1 week sample in Minnesota and probably ball out because of all those weapons. And then everyone just gets to make fun of the Giants, even though we have 5-6 years of evidence that it wasn't going to work out there. But people just like jumping on the Giants sometimes. Who can blame them? So again, just a few injuries for Thanksgiving, guys. But now time to get into all of our rankings goodness after a quick word to Fantasy Life Plus. So, Dwain, I'm not sure if you've heard, but I have been told that Matthew Berry went a little off script on Sirius XM on Wednesday and doubled the planned discount for our Black Friday sale. Here is the new deal that is live right now. You can get 50% off any Fantasy Life Plus package with code BF50. That's right, 50% off Fantasy Life Plus with code BF50. This covers the entirety of this season, the fantasy football playoffs, next fantasy football draft season, and then the first 12 weeks of next year. We are talking 365 days, people. So not just a discount for the rest of this season. If you want to go now, again, BF50 for any Fantasy Life Plus package, you are setting yourself up to have not only the rest of this year, all the way through draft season, and then again, the first 12 weeks of next year as well. So 12 months of Dwayne's rankings, my rankings, Freedman's rankings, the utilization score, and our entire suite of tools that, again, we have so much more on the way for, but some pretty cool stuff now as well, like our start sit, waiver wire assistance, and much more. So Fantasy Life Plus also includes sports betting and DFS tools. You can find all this at fantasylife.com. And again, use code BF50 to get 50% off on Fantasy Life Plus. That's promo code BF50 for 50% off Fantasy Life Plus. Rankings Thursday, which means it's time for some risers, some fallers, some Freedman's favorites, and sicko starts. But first, a quick look at our overview consensus rankings at quarterback. The usual suspects up top, Hurts, Lamar, Josh Allen. But look at that, sitting pretty as QB4, Mr. Baker Mayfield. Buccaneers country, let's bake. Rounding out the top 12, though, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, and yes, Anthony Richardson. Those rushing yards in Fantasyland sure are a hell of a drug. And Richardson, to his credit, has been playing a bit better as a passer since getting back off the bench. So good stuff there, Dwain. But again, we do want to focus on Mr. Mayfield, the QB4 on the season in fantasy points per game. I mean, he is tied with Lamar Jackson for the most top 8 finishes in fantasy this season. And accordingly, Dwain, he is your riser of the week.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention him just because I got a lot of questions about him last week, coming back off of the bye and people, where are we really going to put him? So I just really wanted to call him out this week and just kind of, double down that we need to have him in most fantasy lineups. And that's why, we originally had Kyler Murray in this spot, which I'm going to write about Kyler Murray. You guys can read about him in the article. It'll post either later today or tomorrow morning as far as the rankers, risers, and fallers for the week. But I really wanted to look at Baker. You already mentioned it, Ian, 21.5 fantasy points per game. That's 4th in the NFL. Essentially, this man is in the Joe Burrow tier. There are the elite passers that give you a little bit of rushing upside, and that's where we are right now with Baker. He's given us 221 yards on the ground and 3 rushing touchdowns. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 3.6 extra points per game in fantasy. So if you're a good pocket quarterback, right, and you're getting 17 fantasy points per game, that makes you a low-end QB1, right? And it's borderline. Which week is he in? Which week are they out? Well, once you tack those other 3.5 points on, Ian, we bump up to that 21.5 range. And like you said, right there with the elite quarterbacks. Like, I only have him behind the guys that are the true dual threats, right? Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels. And honestly, our consensus this week, you just saw it, guys. He's ahead of Jaden Daniels with most rankers. I have him 1 spot behind that. So you got Mike Evans back. He should be full health. He was only 65% route participation last week. Would expect him to be more like 80 to 90%. You get a great matchup against the Panthers. We've got the 8th most fantasy points given up through the air per game. So pocket passers do really well against them. 15.7 points per game. The number 3 boost to fantasy quarterbacks on the season per our DVP tool, 4.9 points per game. Obviously, carry a huge team total this week because you're playing the Panthers, 26.5. So like I could keep listing more things, but I think people get the point. Baker's been good. He's going to continue to be good. And I have a confession, Ian. You and I, we were hanging out in New York. We were at the flex drafts. Thank you, Jake Seeley of The Athletic, for putting those together. We were in a super flex format. I passed on Jaden Daniels in round 2. I took Kyler Murray in round 1, and I was kind of mad about it later because I really wanted Jaden Daniels. Debro got him, and it all worked out because I had to come back and later get Baker Mayfield. And what that allowed me to do is get Devon Achane and Nico Collins onto my team as well by passing quarterback there. So it ended up working out really well. I've got Baker stacked with Mike Evans, and I like him better than I do Kyler, the guy I took in the first round. So it's funny how these things work out.
I remember that day, Dwain, as you had, quite a few IPAs before about 1 p.m. And I think your exact words were something like, you never dream of going to a fantasy draft and saying, oh, man, I've drafted Baker Mayfield. But yeah, man, you're happy you did. And I'm sure everyone else is. And Freedman, everyone else should also be happy that you have him the rest of the way, because it's not just the Panthers this week, man. It's the Raiders after that. Tougher matchup against the Chargers. But then the Cowboys and Panthers, man, in the ever important weeks 16 and 17. I know this week we don't need more than one hand to count the number of quarterbacks we want over Baker and Freedman. I think that remains true again the rest of the way as well.
Yeah, you mentioned great setup for him to close the season, but let's talk about this week. I'm a little bit sad, Ian, that you haven't mentioned the hashtag revenge game that he has going against the Panthers. It was just 2 years ago, which it feels like a lifetime ago, but just 2 years ago, Baker Mayfield had a 1-5 record with the Panthers, who had just demoted him a second time to the backup role. Like less than a week later, he was cut. His NFL future was in doubt. And now here he is 2 years later. Since joining the Buccaneers, he's had more passing touchdowns than any other quarterback in the league. Just absolute unreal stuff. In his 8 games this year with Mike Evans, he has been a top 10 fantasy finisher in every game but one. And most of the time, it's been top 6. I don't see why that would change this week. And this week especially, Dwain mentioned the high total. I had this on the look ahead market at 43.5 when I bet it, logged it in the free fantasy live bet tracker. The projection is now at 48.5. So I think there's significant upside in this game, even at the current over under of 46.5. The Buccaneers 7-4 to the over, the Panthers 8-3 to the over. These are two over happy teams. I think we see a lot of production, a lot of points in this game, and I think that means good things for everybody, especially Baker Mayfield.
Especially if Bryce Young keeps playing as relatively well as he has been, lately as well, with his own second lease on life with that Panthers squad. So good stuff there. Not as good stuff, though, with our faller of the week. And Dwain, you got to explain yourself here, man. Tua Tagovailoa leading the Dolphins offense that's been top 5 in pretty much any advanced metric you want to look at since returning in week 8. And he's falling? Do you hate points, Dwain? Yeah. Explain yourself.
No, I love points. It's just a little bit of a tough spot this week for Tua, and we've got a full slate. So we don't have anyone on bye this week, and he truly is just a pocket passer. He's not going to give you much on the ground. And look, running red hot, Ian. I mean, I can't deny it. 23.5 fantasy points against the Raiders, 28.5 versus the Patriots over the last 2 weeks. So he feels like a must start, but once you start to dig in, there are some challenges. You're going to play in Green Bay. It's going to be below freezing. It's going to feel 20-ish degrees based on what Kevin Roth talked about today over on Roto Grinders. You guys can check that out for free. But whenever you look at the games with Josh McDaniel, since Tyreek Hill has been in this offense, below 70 degrees, 13.1 fantasy points per game for Tua. And I took out the games where wind was a factor. So it had to be 14 miles per hour or less. We know wind starts to impact things around 15, really becomes an impact at 20 plus. So I got rid of those games too and just looked at the weather for temperature. If you look at the games below 60 degrees, 14.3 fantasy points per game. If you isolate down to 50 or below, 12.1 fantasy points per game for Tua. So as much as I don't normally like to buy into things like this, there really does appear to be something, with the weather and how it impacts, the Dolphins. I will say, even in these games below 50, he still averaged 262 yards per game. They just haven't had the touchdowns. They haven't had the big explosive plays, that really push them over the top as far as fantasy performance goes. So I think I've got him projected at 252, 254. So when I first looked at myself giving him a downgrade, I was thinking, well, I've got him projected over 250 yards. Like, am I really sure about this? But once I dug in, it is a big deal. And games over 70 degrees, Ian, 19.6 fantasy points per game for Tua versus 12.1 at 50 or below. So it really has been a big thing. We also have the Packers, who only give up 12.9 points per game through the air. Just talked about Tua. He's primarily he's a pocket quarterback. He's not going to give you anything on the ground. Now, the Packers could be without Jair Alexander again. He did miss the last 2 practices were DNPs due to the PCL. So I don't think they're going to have him back. That does slightly help out for the Dolphins, but really overall, that hasn't been enough. Odds makers also agree with this, Ian. The Dolphins, it looks like they are going to be chilling, but no, I know that's really kind of a dad joke there. They are going to be chilling on Thursday night. Below average team total for them, 21.8, and they are 4-point dogs. So I do downgrade Tua to mid-range QB2. Not saying he's a must bench. I mean, if you want to start him, you can. I just had too many other guys that I liked over him once you add everything up.
QB 18, and QB 20 from the 3 amigos here today. And yeah, Dwain, I did do some similar research with the sub 50 because Freeman, if you do look at sub 32, man, only have that Chiefs game from last year and then a late December Bills game as well to work off of. So you buying this storyline, Freeman?
Yeah, I am. And the Packers, it's just a different thing when they are at home. And some of that is just the cold, the home field advantage. You'll have warm weather teams traveling who aren't used to the elements. And that's certainly the case with the Dolphins this week. But the Packers with head coach Matt LaFleur, 31-19 against the spread at home. Just one of the best home field advantages in the league. And you'll look at the betting market. I have this projected at 4. There are still some 3s, 3.5s out there. I am on the Packers this week and fully agree with everything that Dwain talked about earlier. Just a downgrade for Tua because of the weather, and then also full 16-game slate. It's a situation where in most fantasy leagues, unless it's super flex, but in most fantasy leagues, you don't have to put Tua into your lineup this week.
One guy Freeman is looking to get in the lineups is Freeman's favorite, none other than Anthony Richardson, playing quite a bit better again since coming back from that benching. But more importantly for fantasy Freeman, he runs the ball more than almost any other quarterback in the league.
Absolutely. So it's easy to look at the things that Anthony Richardson doesn't have going for him this week. So, the first thing, he doesn't have potentially Josh Downs and Ashton Dolan, a wide receiver. His center, Ryan Kelly, is out. Left tackle, Bernard Raymond, hasn't played since week 10. And then, of course, there's the inaccuracy, which is legendary. Like, we don't need to talk about it at this point. It's just known. 47.1% completion rate for the season, a 3.7% interception rate. Like, he is willing to attack defenses downfield, a league best 12.5 intended air yards per pass attempt. That's great. But just last week, he completed only 39.3% of his pass attempts for a scoreless 172 yards. But Ian, the Sheesh Report gonna give you a shout out there. Maybe he's not actually quite as bad as a passer as it seems. There was a drop touchdown. There was a pass of 40 plus yards that was barely incomplete because the receiver couldn't get the second foot down. 79 yards in passing were taken away because of penalties. Maybe Richardson is a little bit better as a passer than we think, but even if we just take that away, what we know he has going for him is the running ability. 335 yards rushing, 3 rushing touchdowns, and then 5 goal line carries, number 3 in the league in that number for quarterbacks, despite playing in only 8 games. Since last year, if we take out the 3 injury impacted starts, 45.2 yards rushing is what he has. That trails only Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. And then there's the matchup. Patriots number 31 in defensive pass DVOA. So for at least this week, maybe Richardson would look like a league average passer, and that is good enough. And then from the betting perspective, 8-4 against the spread is Richardson for his career. Even though as a passer, he doesn't come close to meeting expectations, in the holistic sense, he tends to exceed expectations, at least the market expectations. And I think we end up seeing that again this week.
Freedman's QB 13 on the week ahead of guys like Jordan Love, Russell Wilson, Tua, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, amongst others. And also Matthew Stafford, Dwain, who does come in as your sicko start, coming off several performances where, turns out you give him a healthy Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and Stafford starts becoming one of the more productive passers in the league once again.
Yeah, and there's a really big there's a big tier of high-end QB2s this week. And any of them could really come through. Stafford is the guy, when I looked, that we had the lowest in the ranks across all of us. So I just wanted to highlight him here because he really does fit in a similar tier with other guys. We've got a lot of good pocket passers with solid matchups this weekend. Stafford's one of them. You mentioned it, Ian. The big part, though, we always start with the player. How have they been performing? That is the most important aspect of fantasy, believe it or not. And he has been absolutely balling since he's gotten his starting wide receivers back over that 5-game stretch. Ian, we are now sitting at 282 yards passing per game with 2.4 passing touchdowns per game for Matthew Stafford. You kind of saw what the low can look like last week, only threw for 243, but still got 2 passing touchdowns through the air. Now, a lot of that did come in junk time. Clearly, the Eagles were the better team here, but you saw it. Stafford was still able to come through for you, gave you 19.2 fantasy points. So we're looking at a matchup this weekend, Ian, against the Saints. They give up 271 yards per game through the air. This is not your granddad's Saints. This is not your dad's Saints. The heck, this is not your Saints. If you've been watching football for 5 years, you've not seen anything like this. That's the 3rd most in the NFL. So we've got the matchup working for them. We also got a nice team total going from Vegas. So I think there's a lot of things. You're not going to have to worry about weather in this game. So Stafford is one of these guys. When you go look at him in the ranks, he'll probably be QB 16, 17, 18 across everyone here. But he could easily be the QB 12, right? He's almost the same thing as Sam Darnold, who we all have higher, I believe, but he's right in that same tier. So that's why I wanted to highlight him as the sicko start. He's in less than 30% of starting lineups right now on Yahoo.
Since week 8, getting those wide receivers back, QB 6, 14, 21, 5, and 9. And not exactly in the most cake matchups either. Had the Eagles game and also against a good Dolphins defense zone in there as well. So that was our QB discussion, everyone. Now we are on to running backs right after a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Guys, the days of waiting in lines at midnight to get the best Black Friday deals are over. Now, all you have to do is check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook who have touchdowns on sale all weekend long. Now, that is something to get excited about. And did you think that was it? Well, right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. That's right. Check out the DraftKings Sportsbook app all weekend long to stay up to date on all the touchdown offers available. And don't forget to stay in on the action and use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. You can combine multiple bets together from the same game. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Running back season. Going to show you guys a quick overview of our consensus ranks right now. Shout out to the YouTube fam. And look at that man sitting pretty number one. Not Saquon Barkley. He's number two. It is, in fact, Joe Mixon in the smash spot of all smash spots against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So usual suspects rounding out the top six: Devon Achane, Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey. We got Jahmyr Gibbs right there as well. But also, guys, Chase Brown, RB11, despite the tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Turns out when you basically never leave the field and get 100% of your team's RB touches, tough to move you too far down the ranks. So as we get into now the top 24, back half of those rankings, Derrick Henry, only the RB13, but man, it is a tough matchup against Jalen Carter and that ferocious Eagles defensive line. But the opposite of a tough matchup for Bucky Irving, our RB14, against that Panthers defense that we just love attacking. But guys, want to be focusing again a bit more on someone coming in as our RB16. Dwain, is your RB riser of the week. Aaron Jones now again going up against the Cardinals defense that we don't exactly fear, but more importantly, we did see Aaron's usage get back into workhorse territory last week after a couple weeks where it was a bit more down.
And that's the key. This is pretty simple, right? We want running backs on offenses we like that get a lot of touches. And also if they're good and you throw that on top, that's usually a great equation. And we have all those things with Aaron Jones. So he battled a rib injury for 2 weeks where we really saw his utilization depressed, saw more work for Cam Akers. Last week got in 3 full practices, Ian, and he was back to that dominant role. He gave you 22 fantasy points. And very importantly, the underlying utilization supported that. He had a utilization score of 8.9. Guys, remember the max you can get there is a 10. So 78% of the snaps, 81% of the rushing attempts, had a 58% route participation. That's borderline elite as well. And he had a 12% target share. So he was very, very involved. And if we look at him in the games where he's had at least 60% of the rushing attempts this year, which basically started around week 5, they transitioned to let's just ride Aaron Jones. They finally listened to, our fearless leader, Matthew Berry, free Aaron Jones. The Vikings decided to do it. Now there's been 3 games where injuries have limited him. So if you take those games out, in the games where he's gotten at least 60% of the rushing attempts, averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. The Vikings have the 7th highest game total of the week at 24.8, so above average. And then when we look at the Cardinals, to your point, Ian, not really a plus or a minus matchup. It's a neutral matchup. This is really just more about we like the Vikings. We like what Aaron Jones is doing. So he moves to that high-end running back 2 range. And honestly, he can finish as the running back 1. It's packed up top. I think we can make arguments that Aaron Jones should be in our top 12. He's just right there sitting on the cusp. So yeah, absolutely love everything about him this weekend.
I mean, the dude is now on pace for 326 touches this year. His previous career high, 285 back in 2019. Freedman is one of those things where you have him RB20. Dwain and I are a little bit higher, but there's just so many featured running backs right now in the NFL that you can't have a guy like Jones slipping a bit more into the RB2 range, even if we're still going to be answering the heavy majority of start-sit questions with Jones.
Yeah, we've had a little bit of a running back renaissance this year with a number of guys who are providing something close to workhorse type of production. But I will say now that Daniel Jones is with the Vikings, Aaron Jones might not even be the most important guy on his team with his last name. By the way, shout out the 49ers playing 3D chess. Why sign Daniel Jones when you can let the Vikings do it, and then they will drop Nick Mullins, and then you can sign Nick Mullins? That's basically what I have to say about Aaron Jones. Totally fine player. Absolutely have loved his career. This week with a full 16-game slate, just not quite as interested in him.
Now that's a conspiracy I can get behind. A good job of Freedman. Let's get a little bit negative, though, Dwayne, with their RB faller of the week. Mr. James Conner sticking with this Vikings-Cardinals matchup. Been held to under 3 yards per carry in 3 of his last 4 games. And don't look now, but the Vikings have been awfully stingy against the run, have allowed just 68, 56, 33, and 78 rushing yards over these past 4 games. So Conner, he's trying. Leads the league in total missed tackles on the ground with a nice 69. But yeah, Dwayne, turns out that look kind of tough to rack up fantasy points if you can't average even 3 yards per carry.
Yeah, and look, historically, we've seen this whenever you like one running back a lot in the matchup. Typically, you shouldn't like the other running back. That's just the way the correlation works. Now, 4-point favorites, it's not like we're huge favorites here for the Vikings. This game could be close, and it could go either way. So I'm not too worried about that part. But Trey Benson, man. Last 3 games, Ian, has been eating away at the rush share for Mr. James Conner. 24%, 31%, and 31% of the carries for Trey Benson in these last 3 games. So they've been a little more interested in the rookie. Now, this could have to do with Amari DiMercado's shoulder injury. But so because of that, you've seen a little bit more passing game work for James Conner. So sometimes we will see these scenarios where coaches really have more of a snap, count or a pitch count. You'll hear people say, for the player. And it may not so much be about the percentages. So it could just be, well, we're going to give him a little more passing game work. So we're going to relieve him, with Trey Benson. So I don't want to get overly worried about that, but it is a 3-week trend. DiMercado has been battling the shoulder injury. So maybe it's just that. But the big thing here is the Vikings, they've held opposing running back rooms to 3.8 points under their season average. So that makes them the 3rd toughest matchup for running backs. So it's really tough to gain these yards against the Vikings. They give up the least rushing yards per game at 68.4. And we already mentioned it. The Cardinals are 4-point dogs. So Conner would really need to come through probably in the passing game to make it worth using him this week. And it's kind of like what Freedman said, his thoughts on Aaron Jones. It's a full slate. So it's just really hard. It's not that we can't use James Conner, but it's hard to get overly excited about him this week. He does still come out like as a mid-range running back too, but he profiles really more as like a low-end running back too, honestly, based on what we've seen historically with other players in spots similar to this. So I've got him as a downgrade this week.
Again, not loving it this week, but potentially in the fantasy playoff, guys, we could be really getting behind James Conner. Only the New York Jets actually have a cozier schedule in terms of their opponents. Fantasy points per game allowed to RBs in weeks 15 through 17. So, Freeman, good reminder for everyone out there. God forbid you're in a league where Trey Benson, only rostered in 28% of ESPN leagues, is on your waiver wire. Could be what the kids would call a league-winning fantasy asset down the stretch. God forbid anything happened to Conner.
Yeah, I like that call out. In one ESPN league, like one of those friends and family leagues, I've had Trey Benson on my roster the entire season. Probably just going to stay there the entire season as I fail to make the playoffs, and could have used that roster spot in a much more profitable way. But I digress. James Conner, Dwain mentioned it. Not a great setup for him this week. A road underdog who is in a tough matchup, and my total projection for the game leans to the under. So you start him if you have him. He's a totally cromulent RB2 flex option, but a little bit of downgrade in terms of the expectations for what we should get out of James Conner this week.
Speaking of some handcuff running back situations, we actually have Braylon Allen, another guy who just mentioned has a pretty nice, stretch coming up. Only owned in 16% of ESPN leagues. And if you're listening to this right now, might be a good idea to go ahead and pick him up if possible, because Breece Hall is dealing with a knee injury, will not practice on Wednesday. It does seem unclear for Sunday. So coming off that bye, you really do hate to see guys, again, starting off the week with a DMP. I mean, Dwayne, if we do see Braylon Allen RB1, not saying it'd be a 1-for-1 swap with Breece Hall, but I mean, I'd play him over James Conner.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty close, honestly, to a 1-for-1 swap with Breece Hall. We love Breece. I think Breece is better in the passing game, so that would be the thing you would have to find out about Braylon Allen. More of a check down guy, whereas Breece has shown he can do a little bit more than that. But yeah, Braylon Allen, man, he would be pushing towards high-end running back 2 territory if for some reason we did not have Breece Hall in the lineup this weekend.
Just check my crappy home 8-man league and someone sniped me. Some of the perils of being on podcast. Dang it. All right, let's get to Freedman's favorite of the week. Someone who's also benefiting from a lot of injuries. And Freedman, it is Amir Abdullah. Elite usage last week. Now that was with Alexander Madison and Zamir White out. Zeus is still not practicing. We do have Madison in a limited fashion. So I'm assuming this is contingent on the Raiders' usual top 2 running backs remaining sidelined.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week, Alexander Madison, Zamir White, both out with doubtful tags. I'm still a little bit skeptical that we end up seeing Alexander Madison this week, but obviously monitor the practice reports. And with this being a Friday game, at least we know in advance. So it isn't a question lingering into the weekend. But if Madison and White are out, then that means once again in your super degenerate 32-team dynasty leagues with 40 roster spots, Amir Abdullah would be someone that you would probably want to start. In their absence last week, Abdullah was the lead back, and you mentioned the utilization, 89% snap rate, 57% rush share, 80% route rate. And that information, of course, is from our industry-leading Fantasy Life utilization report. And with that utilization, 65 yards, okay, nothing all that special about it, but he did get the touchdown on 8 carries and 6 targets. You look at the guys that are competing against him in that backfield. Sincere McCormick, that sounds like a fake name, or it sounds like the name of some sort of like cooking company. Barely was on the field, had just 5 carries. Rookie Dylan Lobb didn't see even 1 offensive play. So if Madison and Zamir White are out, once again, Abdullah, someone that you could probably stomach in a situation where if you're just kind of desperate, looking for a flex, he could be a guy who helps you at least not lose your matchup.
Did not think I would be ranking Amir Abdullah ahead of Travis Etienne in the year 2024, but sometimes the fantasy football life comes at you fast. Dwain takes us to our sicko start of the week, and we did receive word that J.K. Dobbins is expected to miss at least a week with that knee sprain. Gus Edwards accordingly set up pretty nicely as the Chargers' new RB1.
Yeah, available in 57% of Yahoo leagues, rarely in a starting lineup, only 7%. Obviously, that should go up now that we know that J.K. Dobbins is out. But it's kind of rare that this late in the season that you could have actually a player that you might be able to plug into your starting lineup just sitting on your waiver wire at the running back position. Now, it's a full slate, and like we've mentioned many times, it's a good year for running backs. But, man, he could still be useful in a flex, especially if you're playing in a deeper league. So looking at Gus Edwards last week after the J.K. Dobbins injury, he was the primary ball carrier by far. Now, Kamani Vidal was not available for that game. He's been a healthy scratch since Gus Edwards returned from IR. We will see Vidal back in the lineup. He probably takes some of the passing down work, but I think Gus Edwards is the early favorite, Ian, to lead the team in carries. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 65% of the rushing attempts against a Falcons defense, giving up 127 yards per game on the ground, 28 rushing attempts allowed to opponents. So it's been a situation that's been profitable for running backs, and we know that the Chargers have had these games where they're very willing to get into that groove and just start pounding the rock. They've got a pretty good offensive line. So I think there's a lot to like here with Gus Edwards as a sicko start. I moved him into the running back 3 conversation. I mean, I think you could argue him as high as like borderline running back 2. You don't want to get carried away just because, again, we don't have anyone on bye and there's so many other good running backs, but definitely could be a flex play.
Guys, good stuff on running backs, but plenty of more stuff to get to with wide receivers and tight ends right after a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwain, we both know there's nothing like being at a game in person, and personally, some of my favorite experiences over the years has actually been at fight nights. I was in Atlanta one time. I got to see the best fight I've ever seen in person, Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum for, at that point, I believe the interim 185-pound title, but 2 dudes absolutely slugging it out for 25 minutes, followed by Max freaking Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. Again, I will put UFC cards up against any sport as a live viewing experience, and my go-to go-to app for trying to find those sorts of tickets is over at Game Time, not just for sports though, but also for concerts and shows too. I was actually scrolling through the Game Time app the other day and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks, and it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats. And again, they make it so easy that it is a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and get this. Use code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LIFE. That is LIFE, baby, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to run through a brick wall after that. Shout out Game Time, and shout out to our consensus wide receiver rankings. Another Texan is at the top of the leaderboard. Nico Collins ahead of the smash spot against the Jaguars, followed by A.J. Brown, expected to not see Devonta Smith again. We'll see what happens, but just again, the rankings currently getting a nice push for that reason. Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, and our one true sun god rounding out the top 6. Also, guys, Cortland Sutton and George Pickens sitting pretty in the top 12 despite no bye weeks. What a time to be alive. So as we flash over to the wide receiver 2 territory for our lovely YouTube subscribers, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, and Drake London, wide receivers 13 through 16, and also Jacoby Myers and Jackson Smith and the Jigba cracking that top 18. Both guys really on heaters as of late. So one guy we do not have in the top 24, Dwain, although it would not surprise any of us if he does manage to work his way into it this week, Brian Thomas Jr., who yes was performing a little bit lesser than usual before the bye, but has had an extra week to get healthy, and fingers crossed could be getting his quarterback this week as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's yet to have an opportunity to really capitalize on the Christian Kirk injury, because the chest injury happened right after that. That limited him in weeks 8, 9, and 10 as far as what he was able to do. But he did start showing signs of life in week 11 with a 25% target share at a 7.1 utilization score. So looking like he was getting healthy. Now, to your point, Ian, you get the bye week. So that should be another week where he's feeling better. And then if you look at it, in these games where he's been healthy this year, man, he's got a 22% target share, even whenever we still had Gabe Davis, who's also now out, as well as Christian Kirk. And in those games, averaged 15.1 fantasy points per contest. Now, we just need Trevor Lawrence back. That's the main thing here. So Lawrence practiced on Monday. He got a rest day yesterday. They're going to see how he responds today. So if he does not play, then this will be a downgrade for Brian Thomas Jr. Right now, I'm assuming Trevor Lawrence is going to play. And we saw some really good things last year once this offense consolidated around just 2 players. We saw Calvin Ridley and Evan Ingram, after the loss of Christian Kirk, account for 52% of the Jaguars' targets. I think you're going to get a very similar situation the rest of the way this year. It's going to be all about Brian Thomas Jr. as well as Evan Ingram. So I've got him as my wide receiver 23 this weekend. And honestly, I wouldn't even care that much about the matchup, but this one is good, right? You're playing against the Texans. They've greenlighted the 6th highest fantasy boost, Ian, to the wide receiver position at 4.7 points per game. So that's a nice positive. So yeah, borderline wide receiver 2, but to your point, he has wide receiver 1 upside. Like this guy, again, 15.1 fantasy points per game whenever you had a loaded, I don't want to say loaded because the Jaguars haven't been good, but plenty of target competition. Now the target competition is gone. This guy could be a 20-point per game player the rest of the way. So I really like Brian Thomas Jr.
Freedman, thoughts on BTJ, who, hey, if you want to just watch the film of all the rookie wide receivers this year and say he's been the best, I would not necessarily disagree with you.
I thought about including him this week in Freedman's favorites. I'm just a little bit more pessimistic on whether we actually see Trevor Lawrence return. And so the setup is great in terms of target competition. No Christian Kirk, no Gabe Davis. As Dwain mentioned, a pretty decent matchup. Still, because I don't know for sure that Trevor Lawrence is returning, I just didn't want to highlight a guy who might have Mac Jones throwing him the ball. So a little bit tentative. Just have to wait and see if Trevor Lawrence actually suits up this week. If so, I will move him up the ranks. If not, I will be fine fading a little bit Brian Thomas Jr. this week, even though, as you mentioned, he has been a great rookie wide receiver this year.
And he goes to low end wide receiver 3, like if it is Mac Jones, just so people are wondering, like, what do you do? He's borderline wide receiver 2 right now, would fall to borderline wide receiver 3 territory if it's Mac Jones.
Takes us to our wide receiver faller. And this one is spicy, Dwain, because there is a chance, I hope people were able to listen to us before the kickoff, on Thursday, but you might be talking about Jamison Williams as a faller, Dwain, right after he has scored like a 60-yard touchdown or something on Thursday morning. So, hey, you've already made your bet here, but tell us why you are not feeling good about JMO ahead of this spot against the Bears.
Well, we've loved JMO for the last 2 weeks, so we just follow the data. That's the beauty of this, right? I mean, we can't help it the way these things work out. But there are a few things working against JMO, in my opinion, this weekend. Number one, Sam Laporta has been more of a factor over the last 3 weeks. He's got an 18% target share. We know Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to do Amon-Ra St. Brown things. A little banged up, so we'll have to monitor that. But when we have the three guys that we're having to share with and an offense that can go run heavy at any time, that does hurt. Now, look, when you look at the Lions, they still have the highest team total on the slate. So to your point, Ian, JMO could totally come through. It only takes one play. That's the beauty of him. So I'm not calling him a must bench or anything here, but you and I have had him more in that wide receiver 2, mid-range wide receiver 2 for the last couple of weeks. This week, I have him in low-end wide receiver 3 territory because we have all the teams back from bye, and then you've also got just a situation where the pie is being sliced up too many different ways and not an easy matchup, man. I know the Bears haven't been as good recently, but only giving up 23.7 points per game to opposing pass catchers. That's the 5th lowest mark in the NFL. 207 yards per game and 0.8 touchdowns allowed through the air per game. That's the 3rd least in the NFL. So just a situation where we could see the clamps get put on this passing game. And we know that the Lions can just run if they want. They can win through the run game. So we've seen them willing to actually just go after the weakness of other teams, and that could happen here.
I agree with everything you said, Dwain, but I do hope you're wrong just for the potential comedy aspect of this. So we'll see what happens with JMO, but someone we are feeling much better about. Freedman's favorite one, Jerry Jeudy, who don't look now, could have more targets than ever if Cedric Tillman is not able to clear the concussion protocol ahead of Monday night's matchup against the Broncos.
Yeah. The hashtag revenge game strikes again. Jerry Jeudy, his first career game against the Broncos, who drafted him, had him for the first 4 years of his career. It's not like Jeudy was a bust with the Broncos, a little over 3,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, receiving 8.6 yards per target with the team, but he didn't live up to the expectations that accompanied him as the number 15 pick in the 2020 draft. The team traded him, but now with the Browns, I don't want to read too much into a small sample, but since week 8, in his 4 games without number 1 wide receiver Amari Cooper, who was traded, and with quarterback Jameis Winston as the starter, Jeudy has 379 yards, 1 receiving touchdown on 36 targets. Now, the matchup is tough. The Broncos, number 1 in defensive dropback EPA. They get after the quarterback with a really high blitz rate, number 3 blitz rate in the league. And then they have one of the league's best shutdown defenders in cornerback Pat Surtain. But the Broncos could be without their number 2 cornerback in Riley Moss, who's dealing with a knee injury. And Winston is the kind of like teammate-focused YOLO passer who would be like, oh, hey, Jerry Jeudy, you're playing against your former team. We're just going to air it out. Like, I'm going to give you multiple opportunities downfield to hit a big play. That's even if he happens to be shadowed by Pat Surtain. And if Winston doesn't force the ball to Jeudy for like the revenge focused reasons, he could still get the extra targets, as you mentioned, if Cedric Tillman, who's dealing with a concussion, is unable to suit up. So Jerry Jeudy, he's like on that borderline of like, would I actually want to start him? Because the matchup is so tough, but still I feel like just given the volume and then given the hashtag revenge, I probably will be going with him this Thanksgiving weekend.
5 years ago, Jameis helped enable Brashad Perryman down the stretch and help win many of their fantasy championships. Maybe, just maybe, Jerry Jeudy is the next reclamation project, I should say, for the artist known as Famous Jameis. Dwain, sicko start of the week. Xavier Legette getting in your bag on this one. And, I would make fun of the Quentin Johnston call from last week, but you already did that. So kudos to you, man, for owning up to that brutal, just miserable call.
Well, these are sicko calls, so they're not usually easy. One of the rules is they can't be in 30% or more of lineups, and so we clear that here with Legette, only in 24% of lineups. In fact, he's available in 73% of leagues. So if you are in a true sicko league and you're hurting for some reason, Legette is a name that I would consider grabbing and throwing into my lineup. The biggest thing, again, we always start with the player, Ian, and the number one thing we can say about Legette, the team liked him enough to take him early in the NFL draft. And then the last 3 games, we've actually seen him in a full-time role. So since Deontay Johnson has been gone, 96% route participation. So that is absolutely elite, not leaving the field. He's got a 19% target share. That's not elite, but that's wide receiver 3 worthy. Historically, over the last 10 years of data, guys in that 19 to 20% target share range, they do a good job of producing wide receiver 3 results. I haven't necessarily seen that consistently from Leggett. We've got a wide receiver 26, 44, and 33 performances over the last 3 games. So 2 out of 3, he's been in that wide receiver 3 conversation. And whenever you look at the matchup this weekend for Leggett, it's pretty nice, Ian. You get 251 yards per game allowed by the Buccaneers, 1.7 passing touchdowns per game. So I do think that Leggett has a chance here to come down with 4 or 5 catches, maybe 60, 70 yards. You get a touchdown. You're feeling pretty good about having him in your lineup. And there were a lot of ways we could have gone on receiver, I'll just say. So you guys will have to check out rankings, risers, and fallers. There's other people I could have gone Adonai Mitchell here. We could have gone Dontavian Wicks with Romeo Doubs probably out. A lot of potential options here at wide receiver that could jump into that wide receiver 3 range due to some of the things happening on this weekend slate.
Make sure you check out Dwayne's Rankings, Risers, and Followers article, always free at fantasylife.com. So good stuff there, gentlemen. Now time for some tight end discussion. Getting our top 12 on the screen for the squad. And yeah, guys, death taxes. Brock Bowers leading the way with our top 12. Also, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Jonnu Smith there near the top. Would be a lot cooler if Trey McBride could catch a touchdown one of these days. Does have a really nice schedule, though, rounding things out. So I don't think that streak will go too much longer. Hopefully, I didn't just jinx it with that, though. Taysom Hill coming in as the tight end 7, and that is what we're going to be picking up because Freedman, last time we saw the man, he was breaking fantasy football on his way to running for 3 touchdowns, and you are going back to the well this week, and accordingly, he is your Freedman's favorite.
Yeah, I've had Taysom Hill highlighted in the favorites article each of the past 3 games. I'm not stopping that trend now that he is coming off of that, as you mentioned, week-breaking performance just a couple of games ago. You know, at 34 years old, Hill is always seemingly at risk of breaking down. He always seems to be just a little bit nicked up, missed some time in the middle of the season, but coming off of the bye with that extended rest, I think he should get his full customary workload. And we've seen him especially be used as a pass catcher within the offense since he returned from injury in week 8, a 50% route rate, 30% target rate, 19% target share, and he's leveraged that with 21 targets and to 148 yards receiving. No Chris Olave, no Rashid Shaheed, no Bub Means. And in his 2 games this year without Olave, his most recent games, he's been especially used in the passing attack, a 34% target rate and 25% target share. And then, of course, that's just sort of like the cherry. What he really does is the rushing production. 20 carries, 191 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground since week 8. Now, obviously, that is not sustainable. Like last week is the outlier. He's not going to average 9.6 yards per carry moving forward, but 7.9 yards per carry this season, 5.9 since 2022. For his career, 5.6. Like, he is a good runner. That is why the Saints steadily give him week in and week out 4 to 6 carries. And now Kendre Miller on IR. Jamal Williams not certain to return this week, last played in week 8. So that means once again, especially near the goal line, the Saints could use Taysom Hill as a rushing specialist. 4 rushing touchdowns on 6 carries inside the 10-yard line this year. When he gets the ball near the end zone, he usually scores. And then going against a Rams defense without free safety John Johnson, there are maybe only 4 or 5 guys that I would start at the position ahead of Taysom Hill, as disgusting as that kind of sounds and feels.
The Saints de facto goal line running back who we can play at tight end in fantasy for some reason. Don't hate the player, hate the game, but we don't hate the game either. So yeah, start Taysom Hill. Dwayne takes us to your sicko start of the week. And this one feels personal, but anytime you get to play a tight end with 2 games with more than 35 yards, 0 touchdowns on the season, and just doesn't seem like an overly good real life football player, you got to do it. So tell us about Dalton Schultz, someone who you have ranked all the way up there at tight end 21 this week.
My plan for this segment was just to say a couple of things and then let you spout off all the negativity about Dalton Schultz. So, I mean, I was just kind of trying to conserve energy for the Thanksgiving holiday. That was my strategy. You know, Freedman's got his eating strategies. I'm just trying to, you know, keep that mental capacity for all the conversations I'm going to be in with family tomorrow. But yeah, look, it's gross. It's Dalton Schultz. To your point, I'll be honest, like looking through all these, I just felt bad. I felt like I couldn't name Kyle Pitts, even though he's not in a lot of starting lineups. You know, you got the Falcons coming off the bye week, so that's probably part of it. You got Sam Laporta that's in this range. Dalton Kincaid coming off of a bye week should be back. Cole Kmet. So I could have named any of those guys. I did go with Dalton Schultz for one simple reason. He's playing the Jaguars. I mean, so the Jaguars are giving up 290 yards passing per game. You know, we've got a nice team total here, so there's a chance for Dalton Schultz to get on the action. By no means should you be taking this advice as saying, oh man, Dwain thinks that Dalton Schultz should be in my lineup like as a top 10 tight end. Guys, I still have him like tight end 21. But if you're just really hurting, you're playing in an absolute gross sicko league, this is a guy that could be on your waiver wire. And if you had to get him into the lineup, I can't really imagine a reason why you would. But if that did happen, I would go ahead and use him. And I may switch this even because Dallas Goedert's right there next to him, Ian. And now that it sounded like Devonta Smith is not going to play, that's one less mouth to feed. And we've also got a good matchup for Goddard as well. So Goddard would be my alternate.
Social, I just need you guys to clip that one part where Dwain said Dalton Schultz, top 10 tight end who needs to be in your lineup. Don't actually do that if you're listening, but yeah, we will see what happens there, and we will see what happens on Thanksgiving. Everyone out there, have a great one. We are thankful for you always tuning into the Fantasy Life show. So enjoy the day. For Freedman, for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I am Ian. Thank you again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show, and until next time, take care, everybody.